Welcome, poets, to the first ever The Poet's Dilemma podcast. I'm your host, Jacquelynn King. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to walk us through the structure and expectations that you can glean from this experience we'll share together. Every episode is going to start with a poem from either an esteemed or an entirely unknown writer that contributes to an evoked thought where choice has and continues to have to be made. We'll then spend the preceding time on discussing such topic, theme, emotion, dilemma that the poem grapples with, diving into the human experience of choice. Every day our lives move from choice to choice, some mundane, some medial, and others wildly exhausting and influential to ourselves and the world at large. As we enter into this first episode of the podcast, called The Poet's Dilemma, that oozes and begs for the insight into how we make choices, why we make choices, and for what. We must begin by understanding, are there free will choices? Does it exist? Am I doomed for eternity when the contingencies of life damned me? Or do I have the power to uplift my life experience? As we begin to ask questions like these, our time together claims no higher knowledge, no proclamation of correctness, nor ultimate truth, but rather invites the opportunity to unveil. A chance to reach our hands into the question we all ask ourselves at least once in our life. What does life mean? What values am I built on? How do I access forgiveness when the hurtful choice was made? What makes the world like a night campfire, undeniably full of light? Let's enter into this space together with an understanding that opinions are different, and that difference is sacred. Some of the topics we'll discuss will focus more on science than spiritualism, and vice versa. Some will leave out entire schools of thought that may resonate with you more intuitively and learned. These discussions will be driven by my experiences that I have had and how I reckon with them. Though, something to look forward to, in later episodes, interviews will take place and will welcome this dialogue. For now, the root of what I'm trying to say is let's use that knowledge gap to teach one another. I am a student of the world around me, and I hold that title with humility and gratitude. All right, before we continue to discuss the concept of free will choices, which I tangentially would like to include doesn't containerize free will. The topic of free will is for another day. I don't want to get into the theorization of the simulation in episode 1. We'll spare everybody that. Let me explain how each episode will wrap up now. I will conclude with a poem of my own that sheds light on what I've contemplated, what I have experienced, imagined, and wish to create and recover from. Of course, it is a poem, so it will be tickled with imagery, metaphor, surrealism, and absurdism in an attempt to help you understand me by understanding yourself a little bit more. And while each of our lives are unique, our experiences are weaved into a unified web of breathing. Everything alive on Earth does it. Our force calibrated into a pulse of electricity, creating our universe of dilemmas. Let's get into it. The dilemma on cue for today. Do I have free will choices? To open this discussion, I wanted to introduce a poem I first read while I was in high school by the renowned and iconic Maya Angelou. This poem was published in 1978 in Angelou's third poetry collection titled, "And Still I Rise." The language of her work embodies the resiliency of the Black community and the hope required to float above the belittlements and treachery of society. This poem effortlessly demonstrates that among each dilemma of racism, classism, gender, and personhood, Angelou chooses to rise. Her relationship with imagery exists as if she is painting words. I invite you to move with her phonetics as the bristles of her brush. This poem is called Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. We needed a music break after that one. All right, so some of you might be asking, what the heck is free will choice? Free will choice is the belief that as individuals with sound mind and heart, we have the agency of decision making. We will examine the vitality of this through the lens of philosophy, very briefly then by science, because I am not a doctor, and then we'll wrap up with a little bit of politics. For millennia, the brightest minds in the world have asked this question of choice. Do I have it? And do the choices I make matter? What is destiny? And if it exists, is my life predetermined for me? Time and time again, I find myself coming back to the existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and sexy, sultry Albert Camus. He's the dead man I'd elect to play tennis with again and again. They all ask this question of agency and accountability. Writing during Nazi-occupied France, which fell far too quickly to the establishment of Vichy France, many French civilians were left to determine, do I out my neighbor hiding Jews in the attic? Or do I do as Camus and sneak in the night to distribute La Combat, the clandestine newspaper writing the true horrific realities perpetuated by the Nazis? In Paris, during World War II, there were 3 camps, no dark pun intended, that were established: the resistors, the collaborators, and the complacent. Complacency in this regard represents the lack of action. So think of flight or fright, adrenaline response. This category is freeze. But when we think about free will choice, this is more than an anatomical visceral response state. There is not only body involved, but there is mind. And what agency does the mind choose? In Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he uses the Greek mythological story of Sisyphus as a physical manifestation of the philosophy of existentialism. Existentialism, in a superlative, is the claim that existence precedes essence. Does that feel good? Do we understand? Existence precedes essence. So first, we exist, thrown into our pot of chance, which we will call contingencies. And then through our agency of self, we decide and create our meaning. Now, going back to our story, for those who have forgotten, Sisyphus often defied the gods with his wittiness, which the gods didn't like very much. They didn't like having tricks played on them. So, because of this, long story short, involving Hades, Persephone, Hermes, and Zeus, Sisyphus was dragged back down to the underworld and punished with an eternal task of rolling a goddamn rock up a steep-ass hill. And just as he nears the top, the rock tumbles back down. Now, in Camus' essay, he claims that this physically demanding task represents the human experience. And Sisyphus's acceptance signifies a reclamation and thereby freedom from his sentence. For within that singular moment when the rock is beginning to reverse inertia, Sisyphus pauses. A moment of relief, awe, and credulity. The belief that the rock is to be real and pushed up the mountain again. Real quick, credulity is a new word I learned and I wanted to use it. I hope I'm saying it right. It means the belief that something is to be real, to be true. For Sisyphus, the moment he chooses pleasure makes his damnation not only bearable, but joyful. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, writes Camus. As challenging as it might be to choose this peace of mind, it is through claiming our agency and accountability that we are inherently beings of choice. And among these choices, we face dilemmas, often grappling with their outcomes for time to come. This poem is 51 by Sappho. I don't know what to do. Two states of mind in me. Pivoting a bit from the existentialist school of thought, I want to touch on a book called Free Will by Sam Harris. I just recently picked up this book as I've moved to Amsterdam. It was on my friend's bookshelf, and it seemed so fitting because I knew the first episode of The Poet's Dilemma was going to be asking this question of free will choice. And what Harris is really uncovering is that through the neurological response patterns from our subconscious to our conscious brain, is that our subconscious brain makes a decision on our behalf seconds before it reaches the conscious level. These neurological responses are built on a series of neurological responses that predicate actions you will effectively cause. Throughout the book, he keeps referring to free will choice as an illusion. And that's, every time I read it in the book, that's how it sounded like he was saying it. Free will is an illusion. That's all I really have to say about that. I'd be interested in people commenting or sending me a note, just giving me your belief and thought on that topic of Sam Harris's free will. All right, so I believe it would be inappropriate to discuss choice without discussing access to education, healthcare, and equal opportunity. As an example of politics moving backwards, I want to discuss Donald Trump's overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States. Let me take a breath, because that was the first time I've ever publicly said his name. Last term, he was only referred to as number 45 because I assumed it to be a black hole in history spiraling in its own axis. But he is not an isolated storm. He's ravenous and very much present in our dimension. And thereby, when I think of governmental purpose, I think of the sole protection of our inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men and women and peoples, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, coming straight out of the USA's Declaration of Independence, a nation that was founded on the protection of choice. The overturning of Roe v. Wade sabotages choice and lays precedent to more lack of access to come. Because to have choice is to uplift your life experience in this capitalistic world. An abortion ban is synonymous with poverty. We must have the ability to not only dream the American dream, but to have a chance to be it. And to be it, we must have access to education and proper female healthcare services. An abortion ban not only doesn't stop abortion, it makes it unsafe. Women will be faced with the dilemma to take a risk because the other has potential to be far more dangerous. Sometimes, when I think about the world, I feel helpless. Then I am reminded of some practical choices I can make to breathe more freedom, more love, and more creativity into the world. I have to take it back to the fundamentals. And as woo-woo as this may sound, I need to hold space for my emotions. By doing this, I can turn my reactivity into proactivity. The first step is unlearning the way I learn to process my emotions. I needed, and still am, unraveling the knots of my coping mechanisms that once upon a time was a method of survival. So here's my disco ball invitation from me to you to start loving who you are and start doing this work too. It's a lifelong journey, but when we choose to pursue the love of ourselves, we choose to dig into the shadow self of who we really are, welcoming them to center stage, to monologue each memory of the first time you felt each emotion capable in life. So while I have not chosen my genetic makeup nor my societal predisposition, I'd like to think I have the ability to choose how I approach their repercussions. This poem is called Some Days. Carry it heavy, warrior stripes that remind us that no one is better than another. Other days, carry it lightly, as a feather tied to your belt of hunt or bee prey. Keep them near your tassels of dreams, lined up against your past life list of if-onlys. We're each walking around this world with a story of immense pain. If not seeded by an insufficient upbringing, then generationally. A story of fleeing a war-torn country, a story of genocidal heritage, a story of master and slave. Systematically, nay, fundamentally, we wake each morning as the sun peeks through our fogged windows, barely letting any light in. We see shapes and make meaning out of patterns, and the universe whispers words along the way. We call them synchronicities. But even still, we're a flawed society with the players so desperately trying to do their best. Why then do we continue to perpetuate the sufferings of our elders? Are lessons too tough to accept? Because to grow would mean to blaze a trail of uncertainty, and perchance see what larger teachings still lie ahead. A different lesson is always to be learned. The Nietzschean thought of never understanding or knowing the true meaning of a word because context is everything. And once removed from that very contextualization that makes that atom, that speck of protons and neutrons at the center of a nucleus activating in a particular space and time, and the relational parallelism that forebodes any of the seemingly non-happenings happening. How do we truly ever understand, if not through empathy? So how about I feel a little bit more about the way you feel when you're telling me the way you feel is this. It's a choice to heal. It's a choice to make our generational trauma stop here. Between me and my sisters and you and your brothers, the trauma can stop here. But we must heal. It's gonna take a lot of love. As Neil plays us in, and the curtain rises. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the very first episode of The Poet's Dilemma. I appreciate you listening, and I'm excited for the journey that lies ahead as we continue to unpack the contemplations and the decisions that we make. And hopefully, through our time together, we will come out on the other side understanding ourselves and the story we choose to write.